You either die a villain, or you live long enough to see yourself become the society.
Islands of safety where history can be remembered and the human being can continue to function in order to maintain the species through a dark age. In other words, we're talking about an underground.
Today, we'll be going over a psychological breakdown of Arthur Fleck Joker as though he were a real person, discussing which parts of the Joker movie were hallucinations and real, finishing with a short review of the movie. Spoilers ahead. Let's put on a happy face. To construct a timeline of Arthur's life, the earliest thing we learn about his childhood is that he was adopted by Penny Fleck. Penny was a maid who worked for Thomas Wayne, and had, at the time, undiagnosed delusional psychosis, meaning that in the case of Penny Fleck, she did not hallucinate dreamlike fantasies of dragons or other fantastical things, but as is characteristic of delusional disorder, simply could not tell fact from fiction when it came to her own life. Another way of communicating this disorder would be that Penny, if looking at a clock, could tell you exactly what time it is, but as soon as she looked away from that clock, to her, it would be whatever time she thinks would be ideal at that moment. This pattern of delusions of ideal situations is exemplified in the flashback scene after Arthur had been found chained at a young age, beaten and starved to a radiator. She thinks subconsciously of the ideal situation to get her out of her terrible life situation. This births the delusion of Arthur being Thomas Wayne and hers genetic offspring in her mind. The second, at the time of her adoption of Arthur, undiagnosed conditions was narcissistic personality disorder, described by the Mayo Clinic as a mental condition in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, troubled relationships, and a lack of empathy for others. However, in truth, they have a fragile self-esteem that's vulnerable to the slightest criticism. We see the lack of empathy towards her son both when she allowed the childhood abuse of him at the hands of her boyfriend, and when Arthur tells her about his hallucinatory but real to him situation of him being able to make it as a big stand-up comedian. She responds in a spaced-out, apathetic tone, "But don't you have to be funny to be a comedian?" One thing to remember about Penny and Arthur's relationship is that the closest thing we hear to an "I love you" from her towards her son is the Orwellian reminiscent line, "But he always seemed like such a happy child," which was her interpretation of Arthur's uncontrollable pain-causing laughter caused by pseudobulbar affect, or PBA for short, characterized by uncontrollable laughter or crying, often brought on by brain damage, which we know Arthur suffered from due to the physical blows to the head at a young age from his adopted mother's abusive boyfriend. It's likely that this is what brought on his laughing condition. The only time through the entire movie I ever saw a suggestion of love being felt for Arthur from Penny was Arthur's hallucination of Murray at the beginning of the movie saying it to him. This is a good segue for talking about Arthur himself. We have no knowledge of Arthur's family mental health due to him being adopted, and this movie works hard to draw parallels between Batman's origin and itself. So we're going to assume, similar to the birth of Batman, that Arthur's mental problems are the result of trauma inflicted upon him. This includes brain damage and life choices he makes with that trauma in tow. From this, we are going to assume that the schizophrenia, which he shows through his various hallucinations, and his pseudobulbar affect, or PBA, were caused as a result of the brain damage he suffered as a child, as well as coping mechanisms to deal with the high level of stress he was experiencing at a young age. Also due to this, our working theory is that the 7 medications he's on at the beginning of the movie are having to do with his schizophrenia. It's very common, especially in the case of mental health medications, for a cycle to develop of taking your first medication for a specific mental problem, assumedly caused by either a biochemical imbalance or a form of neurochemistry problem, if you're taking pills instead of seeking proper therapy. However, those initial pills have side effects, causing future medications to be prescribed to deal with said negative side effects. In the case of schizophrenia, dealing with multiple types of hallucinations, it's pretty obvious how a medication that could help with your visual hallucinations forces audio hallucinations to become more prevalent. This is how you get 7 medications for 1 or 2 mental disorders, as we see with Arthur here. The types of hallucinations Arthur experiences, which are in line with schizophrenia symptoms, are auditory and visual hallucinations, as shown from his first hallucination of being on Late Night Live with Murray, as well as olfactory hallucinations, which have to do with smell or taste, as shown by the sexual hallucination after his first murder. To believe that hallucination, he would have had to feel it as well, so we'll include tactile hallucinations, which are about sense of touch. All of these hallucinations are still in line with schizophrenia. Before we go any further, I'd like to talk about the 2 misconceptions I've seen reviewers report so far about this movie. The first misconception is that the Joker inherited his mental disorders from his mother. Obviously, we know why this can't work. While it is true that the mitochondrial line, meaning mother's side of your family, is where you are most likely to inherit neurological mutations from, thus many forms of mental disorder having to do with brain chemistry, Joker was adopted. You can't genetically inherit things from people you're not related to. The second misconception is that the pills he took were for psychopathy. They were antipsychotics. But we actually see many instances, though incredibly misguided, of him showing empathy, not to mention his self-expressed goal of being someone who, quote, brings joy and laughter to the world. This, of course, is not including both his moment with the kid on the bus, which I think was his least creepy moment. It was obvious he was just trying to make the kid smile, and of course, how much he genuinely loved the short time that he was a hospital clown for cancer kids. These displays of empathy wouldn't have been possible if he were struggling with psychopathy, as one of the key symptoms of psychopathy is a lack of empathy or remorse. His psychotic break wouldn't come until later, if at all. However, before we get into that, let's talk about Arthur's diet and exercise. It's common knowledge that one of the most important things a person can do for their mental health is a proper balanced diet for the sake of vitamins which benefit the frontal lobe of the brain, keeping us more aware and in control of our actions, as well as physical exercise, getting more oxygen to the brain and raising serotonin levels, increasing feelings of satisfaction and joy. Joker did not do either of these things. Due to both the starvation he suffered as a boy and his mother assumedly not feeding him well growing up, he's developed a normal dietary pattern of eating far less than he should. That, mixed with an assumedly high metabolism, resulted in the skinny, starved appearance he has throughout the movie. Okay, let's talk about the meat of the movie, Arthur's mental breakdown and trauma turning into the Joker. So as we've already gone over, Arthur starts out as a brain-damaged schizophrenic taking medication for that schizophrenia, who also suffered from PBA and poor dieting. This caused both his uncontrollable laughter and less exercise self-control. His brain damage also most likely is why he doesn't have a concept of social boundaries or personal space, as shown with the Bruce scene, where Arthur sticks his fingers in Bruce's mouth to make him smile. He also had no father growing up, and he shows a lack of ability to manage aggression from this. He often avoids conflict until the point of mental breakdown, as shown in the scene where he vandalizes his workplace after being fired. Okay, now we can chart the breakdown. So we'll start off with him being mugged. Street kids, probably about in their junior year of high school, steal his sign and gang beat him in an alley. He's then given a gun by his coworker Randall for protection. After this, he is desperate for human connection out of a want for security. Due to this, he engages in stalking behavior towards Sophie, a woman who lives down the hall from him and his mother. He then begins to have hallucinations of a romantic relationship with her. After dropping the gun given to him by Randall in a children's cancer ward, being accused of stealing the sign that was stolen from him at his first job, and having Randall lie about how he got the gun, he is then fired from his job. On his way home from getting fired via payphone, he begins having a nervous laughing fit due to his PBA, at which point 3 drunk Wayne Enterprise employees begin teasing, harassing, and assaulting him. They steal his wig, push him down on the floor of the subway, and begin gang beating him in the same way he was beaten when his sign was stolen. This is when he commits his first 3 murders using 4 bullets in the revolver given to him by Randall. At this point, he's already wasted 1 bullet on the wall at home from a misfire. His first 2 murders are in self-defense, with 3 shots being fired wildly from a laying position to get the kicking to stop. This kills the first 2 men and injures the third. Most likely out of fear of being caught, he chases the third man and kills him with 1 shot on the stairwell leading out of the subway. He then celebrates with a kind of half-dance, half-Tai Chi routine in a public restroom, thus showing that he has begun to associate killing with freedom. He's then, assumedly, sexually aroused from his killing as shown by the real-to-him hallucination of having sexual relations with Sophie. The aspect of associating killing with freedom is most interesting as according to Dr. Jonathan Haidt of Moral Foundations theory, liberty or freedom from oppression is one of the main moral concepts we developed through an evolutionarily trained disgust sensitivity to tyranny. So another way to look at how the Joker views murder in this movie is that it makes him feel clean, it ends his disgust. At this point is when his therapist's funding is cut by the city of Gotham. He's no longer able to, at this point, receive proper medication or therapy. With his schizophrenia in full swing, his hallucinations, and thus his self-justification for outward violent and self-destructive tendencies and actions, increases. While he, in reality, is booed off the stage when trying stand-up comedy, he hallucinates people clapping for him. At this point, when he returns home, he finds a letter from his mother, as yet unsent, to Thomas Wayne. This causes him to believe his mother's delusion, creating in him an internal sense of hope and a belief that he could still be saved alongside his mother from their current position in life. At this point, his mother is hospitalized. His fragile sense of sanity is damaged, but at this point he's still partially held together by the belief that his would-be father, Thomas Wayne, will save him and his mother. It's at this point that he is publicly humiliated on live television, which also destroys one of his beneficial to his self-esteem hallucinations that he somehow did very well when he tried stand-up comedy, and destroys his image of his idol again, causing what little sense of morale he has to be further weakened alongside his self-esteem and sanity. He then goes home and sleeps in his refrigerator, most likely to simulate the safety found in the womb during fetal development as an evolutionary, psycho-associated self-defense mechanism. In other words, he wants to feel safe. I said that last part pretty slow because I understand that I tend to use, garbled, oh, look at me, I know psychology language, so I'm just trying to communicate the information better. Next, he gets a call to be on his idol who just humiliated him, Murray's, late-night talk show. Before the date he is to go on, he uses a protest happening to sneak into a private gala viewing of a Charlie Chaplin movie attended by Thomas Wayne. Here he confronts Thomas about his and his mother's, at this point, shared belief that he is Thomas's son. He is told by Thomas that he and his mother are insane. When Arthur's PBA acts up, causing him to nervously laugh, Thomas Wayne punches him in the face and leaves. To further investigate the truth of his origins, he steals his mother's file from Arkham State Hospital. At this point, he gains self-awareness of the brain damage, starvation, and physical abuse he experienced as a small child, alongside awareness of his mother's narcissistic personality disorder and delusional psychosis, both of which we went over at the beginning of this video. This is when his suicidal thoughts begin. As is common for people who contemplate and plan suicide, I've heard it talked about as a cement box or cage feeling. He now feels as though he has no options left. His self-esteem, morale, and what is left of his sanity now drops out from under him. From here, he also loses the hallucination of him being in a romantic relationship with Sophie. He also possibly kills her. He then kills his mother by smothering her with a pillow. This is when we get into the iconic line of, I thought my life was a tragedy, but now I realize it's an curse word comedy. This is when he begins to plan and practice killing himself on The Murray Show. Randall, the coworker who gave him the gun he used to commit his first 3 murders and lied about him to his boss, comes over along with one of the only coworkers who was ever nice, in quotes, to Arthur, in Arthur's own words, Gary. to his apartment to construct an alibi to the police, possibly to let Arthur take the blame whether or not he was guilty or not, under the obvious guise that they came over to help him grieve over the death of his mother. Joker then kills Randall with a small but sharp pair of hair scissors. 2 stabs to the throat and 1 to the eye. He allows Gary to go free, getting the door for him as he is too short to reach the lock. On his way to the Murray show, we get the dance number to Gary Glitter's Rock and Roll down the stairs as the policemen who have been investigating him begin to chase him down said stairs. We get a nice harsh smack back to reality moment as the music suddenly stops with no fade out. Joker soon loses the 2 policemen in a crowded subway train filled with protesters dressed like clowns. After one of the 2 policemen shoots a protester by mistake, the crowd of protesters mobs him, bringing him down to the floor as they exit the train. As the 2 men are assumedly beaten to death by the mob, the Joker laughs and celebrates this as he gets away. Finally, he goes on the Murray show. Here he confesses to his first 3 murders live on air. This is when he has his rant towards society. His complaints consisted of talking about the hypocrisy of Gotham's constantly changing morally relative worldview of right and wrong that seems to have no real benefit to the average man or the downtrodden. Ranting about the out-of-touch nature of the rich like Thomas Wayne, who through the mentioning of his name on live TV most likely inspires his death later. He openly describes himself as a mentally ill loner abandoned and abused by society. From here, we get one of the most chilling responses in the entire movie, and it is not from Arthur Fleck. It's from Murray, and it highlights the dismissive nature society has towards the mentally ill, and the outright demonization of the mentally ill for any abnormal behavior. Murray, in his response to Joker, represents the out-of-touch and capable of nicety stereotype that Joker claims everyone from the middle class to the rich have become. Even as Murray knows he's sitting next to a self-confessed killer of 3 men, he underestimates the Joker due to his, what is most likely to Murray clear now, lack of natural self-awareness in Arthur. He then, after all we've seen Arthur Fleck go through, the abusive childhood, the brain damage, denial of social belonging, multiple assaults on him before he ever fired a shot or killed anyone, and of course, the complete destruction of the Joker's moral worldview, which Murray himself is partially responsible for, says to Arthur in the most arrogant tone imaginable, "That's an awful lot of self-pity there, Arthur." If you, like me, grew up with mental health issues or in an abusive environment, if you don't know that exact line and tone, then you probably know one similar to it. You know what it's like to carefully and meticulously try to build yourself up as a person, so that despite your issues, you can communicate your problems to someone who might help you. This might be for financial aid, as represented by Thomas Wayne, romantic and/or platonic relationships, as represented by Sophie, or even just acceptance socially, as represented by Arthur's dream of being a stand-up comic. Then to have that person, people, or group tell you that after all your self-improvement that you forced on yourself to become better, that you're still inferior, and that you haven't done enough to change. The very idea to these people that the mentally ill are not terrorizing society, but rather that society is terrorizing the mentally ill, is a toxic anathema and repulsive to their worldview and to them. If you're mentally ill in America, and if God forbid a straight white male virgin, no one thinks you're worth money, platonic friendship, or romantic love, if the media has anything to say about it. Especially the first one and the last one. You don't deserve a normal life, and you'll never get one. He then shoots and kills Murray with his remaining bullet. On the line, what do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abuses and abandons him? You get what you deserve. As he is arrested, he is then put into a cop car. After this, on the way to jail, a car crash sets him free. A protester shoots and kills Thomas and Martha Wayne. Joker is viewed as a hero due to his live rant by the clown mob as they pull him from the crashed car. We then get a shot of him talking to a psychiatrist, assumedly months or maybe a year later, with the line, "I was thinking of a joke." She responds, "What?" Then he finally gives the line, "You wouldn't get it." And of course, as this is happening, we see Martha and Thomas Wayne dead in the alley. As this is being said, he's most likely thinking of the irony that his entire life he's been horribly affected as an after effect of other people's actions, and now, thanks to a rant he went on, arguably the most powerful family in Gotham City is dead. Finally, our movie ends with him assumedly bludgeoning or killing the psychiatrist he was saying this to, and running through the halls as what either are orderlies or guards chase after him. This version of the Joker is not a serial killer like Heath Ledger's Joker in Dark Knight. A serial killer has a specific motive psychologically mixed with a specific method. While an internal philosophy of chaos does begin to develop, the method does change. 3 murders by gun, 1 by smothering, 1 possible kill by unknown methods, 1 murder by stabbing with scissors, 1 more murder by gun, and finally, a possible murder through blunt force trauma. He's also not clinically insane, as part of the definition includes not having physical brain damage, which Joker Arthur Fleck very clearly did have at an early age. This version of the Joker is a spree killer, someone who commits 2 or more killings in a short period of time. This is because all 6 of his confirmed kills and his first possible kill happen within, we know, the same period of seemingly 1 week. So the Joker is a brain-damaged schizophrenic spree killer with pseudo-bulbar affect. This is by far one of the most realistic comic book movies I have ever seen. For psychological and neurological accuracy, I award Joker a 10 out of 10. If you're a psychology nerd like me, see this movie. Okay, now that we've gotten our psychology paper out of the way, we can talk about this movie as a movie. To talk about this movie, I first have to talk about the gross division between critic scores and audience scores, as well as the supposed controversy surrounding it. Now, as far as I know with critic ratings, on Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has about a 65 to 69% rating on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, but when it comes to viewer ratings, it has a 96%, not to mention it's sitting at the 3rd highest ranked movie on IMDb, which thankfully those are controlled by users. It's well known that director Todd Phillips had been speaking out about what you could loosely term as #woke Hollywood, the same collective that, again, you could loosely describe most critics being a part of, which means that most critics went into this movie with, as Paul Joseph Watson put it, a stick up their butts. And yeah, it shows. I mean, more than that, it's also that this movie, it promotes a message of re-examining yourself, and especially if you're someone with immense amounts of power, whether you're in the media like Murray or you're a rich tycoon like billionaires in the world, it's often very hard for people in power or with a lot of ability to ruin people's lives, oftentimes in the case of the media and in the case of people who control employment in this country, to examine themselves, to look at themselves and say, hey, what role do I have to play in making a lot of the people I claim to hate? What role do I have in creating the racist, which is a word I use to describe everyone I don't like? What role do I have in creating the criminal? What role do I have in creating the, quote, thug? And what can I do to minimize my negative effects on the world? If people can manage to criticize themselves, if people with power can manage to criticize themselves, then we get a better world. That's an obvious statement. It's not moral grandstanding. The false accusations against this film include, but are not limited to, 1. Glorifying, quote, incel terrorism, and 2. Encouraging violence. Let's defeat both of these one at a time. Firstly, this movie does feature a protagonist that is, as the definition of incel would dictate, involuntarily celibate. However, the focus in the movie is on his overall loneliness. He has no job, no friends, no real family, no real political or religious affiliations, going so far as to say, before he goes on Murray, I don't believe in anything. So the focus is far more on the suffering that comes from social isolation than specifically on sexual deprivation. It also very specifically cites mental illness and societal apathy, meaning both men and women. With these added qualifiers, it simply can't be addressing, quote, incels. Next is the supposed encouragement of violence, which, no pun intended, is insane. This movie has an incredibly realistic and disturbing view of how violence and murder operate. The gunshots in the first murder scene are loud, sloppy, and ugly. The person injured who Joker chases through the subway shows a genuine fear response. He trembles, blood from his injury rushing down his leg. His hesitation and trembling is played up to show the realism of violence. Furthermore, Arthur is in no way calm, collected, or cool during this scene. The lack of any action music emphasizes this, as well as Joker goes from defending himself on the ground to trying to kill someone, most likely out of fear of being caught by the police. He then runs away in fear, and the musical number of slow string instruments alongside the dark flickering slightly lighting when the Joker does his celebrating slow dance in a public restroom emphasizes the twisting of his worldview into something alien and not normal, something wrong that only comes from a lifetime of abuse. This is the theme hit on in every killing the Joker does. He remarks it to himself when he's killing his mother through the line, "It's a comedy," in reference to his life. Gary gets to live because, quote, "You were the only one who was ever nice to me," with Gary's reaction also being one of realistic shock, horror, fear, and sadness at Randall's murder. I don't think I even need to mention his rant on Murray. The Punisher or John Wick, this is not. Violence is not glorified. If anything, it is gorified. One of the morals of the movie was about spreading awareness of mental health. The movie first shows us what the reaction is of someone who, though still apathetic to Arthur's issues, is not antagonistic, due to her knowledge of Arthur's mental health through the card he presents her with on the bus. We then, in the case of Thomas Wayne, Murray, Arthur's boss, and 3 Wayne employees that assault Arthur on the subway, leading to his first 3 murders, we see people who either were uneducated on his condition, didn't take it seriously, or wanted to abuse him because of it. It's a warning against our dismissive nature and frankly abusive nature towards the mentally ill. At this point, I sound like a broken record, but I care about this issue. I'm not qualified to speak on set design, acting, or directing, but I will anyway. Every bit of outdoor scenery to me represented a beautiful dichotomy between the ever-present garbage and an always skyscraper, large buildings, or upward-facing stairs from a downward angle shot point of view. This both situates us in the literal setting of a rundown 1981 Gotham City during a garbage strike and the narrative setting of the constant dichotomy between Arthur's heroic romantic schizophrenic fantasies and the grittiness of the real world. Something else I wanted to mention is how comedy is done here and how every joke is just as equally tragic. I begin to think about the funniness of something and then it stops in my head before it gets to any real climax of enjoyment. And one of the things that I often find is that I think about the scene where Gary, who is a little person, tries to get Arthur to unlock the door for him, and as soon as I start laughing at the ridiculousness of that, I realize, oh yeah, no, we're in a very real situation with a very real murdered corpse. This is not a show that handles, because of the realistic way this movie handles violence, it's just not done in a way that lets you laugh at physical comedy and lets you laugh at physical humor, or at least for not too long. And this is one of the reasons I do find the criticism of encouraging violence just a horrible one to be laid at the feet of this movie. It horrifies me as it makes me laugh. And that's a hard feat to pull off, but Joker does it masterfully. As for the acting, Joaquin Phoenix did his research for this role to, quote, make a character that a psychologist couldn't diagnose. And I will admit, he did an amazing job throughout the film, especially when the twist hits. The entire movie, you're convinced that Penny Fleck is his biological mom, and that he inherited his condition from her. But then the bomb is dropped that he's adopted and has brain damage. Finally, the camera angles, as I already mentioned, are designed in such a way that highlights the claustrophobic focus on Arthur's character, always close-up shots creating a very tight atmosphere, never really deviating to establishing shots or wide shots except in very rare cases. And that is our review of Joker. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, you can donate to my Subscribestar, subscribe to the YouTube channel, or come and see me on Discord, where I'm always very active in updating people on what videos are coming out next.